are listening to a free version of Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It's Thursday, January 24th, 2019, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live after a brief technical delay in the steps away from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Brian Mier of Brazil Wire, the descent of Brazil into a fascist mafia state and its connection to the ongoing coup in Venezuela. Then Eva Golinger, former legal advisor to Hugo Chavez, is going to be speaking with us about what's happening on the ground now. Turkey, China, Russia reject the U.S. Canadian-backed move to recognize another president and militarily threaten a sovereign government. With the support of many, many Democrats and the silence of others, Mexico and Uruguay and the Vatican are looking to negotiate some type of peace arrangement as we are mid-coup attempt in Venezuela. Rocana, honorable exception, and a few others. We'll get to that and more. Trump's going to delay his State of the Union address. More relaxing next Tuesday for those of us in this studio. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, he's saying he'll vote on a Democratic deal to open the government. Furloughed workers are staging sit-ins outside of senators' offices, and 12 have been arrested. Where's the arrest warrant for Mitch McConnell, who could end this at any time he wanted? And where are the nationwide strikes we need over this and actually a whole lot of other things? Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters are looking to do a joint investigation into Deutsche Bank, which is an important bank to keep track of for all Trump-related irregularities. Well, maybe not all. Jesus Christ. I don't want to think about all Trump-related irregularities. The Pacific Standard is reporting that Trump is set to cancel a 50-year-old environmental law. And air traffic control union leaders warn of unprecedented safety risks as the shutdown continues. Strike now, all that. And much, much more on the Majority Report. Folks, I don't know what that problem was. I think we're good to go now, but we're going to have a shortened opening block. Though, actually, we can play this clip because I told Brian to give me an extra 5 minutes. So, actually, I guess we're only at 12:16. Sometimes enlightenment comes from unlikely sources. A lot of people beef with Chris Cuomo. I actually think Chris Cuomo, for what it's worth, is not. I mean, this is a network that has Jake Tapper, who is consistently outdoing himself in whack. And a whole, cavalcade of guests that I'm not particularly impressed by. But here is Chris Cuomo, of all people. First, he's parlaying some right-wing asshole. what is the guy's name? Do we even want to say? Steve Cortez. I don't even know this guy. They're talking about the border. And, of course, completely artificial, fake crisis to build on people's racial paranoias. It signifies absolutely nothing other than the suffering created by this policy. Cuomo is parlaying that, and first he goes in a brilliant direction. It was like, actually, I could tell you in a national emergency we could deal with poverty. Boom. Then that, of course, sends off the Pavlovian response in all of these idiots, which is do something about poverty. What about Venezuela? And then Chris Cuomo, as a shocked Paul Begala looks on, has a more effective answer on Venezuela than like over 90% of professional Democrats I see in media. Let's check this out.
No, he never said it's a panacea. Will fall. It will fall. That doesn't mean crime will be eliminated. It will fall. And look, Here's the thing about illegal alien crime. You're right. We have a lot of crime in the United States, and there's ways we can and should address that. But illegal alien crime is 100% preventable in every single case. We just had over the weekend the arrest of an illegal alien who killed an elderly 80-year-old couple in Nevada. I mean, this is very real-world pain that these people have to deal with. One of the tools to fight that kind of illegality and that kind of pain is a border wall.
You apply
That's what
that
law enforcement tells us they
to
need.
no other type of crime prevention in this country. The idea that something's 100% you know what's 100% preventable? Poverty. You know what's 100% preventable? Hunger in the richest country in the world. No urgency like that on those problems, though. You get people jobs.
How is poverty 100% preventable? Because are you going to say socialism?
You bring the economy up the way you said you were going to.
Because take a look at Venezuela.
Venezuela. Because that's a great strategy you got going there, right? You starve these countries of support. Then you create environments on the ground where they can blow up, and then you stand back and watch them burn. What are we going to do there now? What are we going to do in the triangle if he cuts aid to them? Come on, Steve.
Look, blaming the United States for the problems of Central America.
I'm not doing that. Don't spin me on my own show. I'm saying that cutting
fair.
funding will only make it worse.
What I love about that clip is there's no analysis I need to do around it. He nailed all of it. The only thing I would add is I do blame U.S. foreign policy for a great deal of problems in Latin America. Folks, big corporations are getting rich by selling your data. And Congress has completely failed to save net neutrality or protect protect your privacy online. Now, internet providers and mobile carriers like Comcast and Verizon are free to restrict websites, spy on your online activity, or sell your browsing history to advertisers. But with one click, ExpressVPN shields your online activity from internet and mobile providers. ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, and tablet. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. Get VPN protection for less than $7 a month. ExpressVPN rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day back money guarantee. If you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. As I always say with this service, which is indispensable, you got to protect yourselves. It was incredibly easy to install, which is my sort of basic make or break with any technology. Seamless, easy to install, and no way changes your experience, but just protects you somewhat from this stalker economy of Silicon Valley. To take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free, go to expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. We'll be right back with Brian Mier.
Backyard where I am smoking a brisket and some ribs. I'm making meats now. Smoking these meats here. Or a little meat smoking.
Oh, Jesus Christ. When you play the sound drops during the break, it's like there's no escape. It's like, can I have 1 minute of my life before I go on air or I talk with my friend Brian Mier, where I don't have to be reminded that Mark Zuckerberg exists? Matt, Jesus Christ.
It doesn't stop.
It never stops. Joining us now is Brian Mier. He is the co-editor of Brazil Wire. You can also find his work at Telesur and any other reputable outlet dealing with Latin America. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, we've been talking for a long time on both the Majority Report and the Michael Brooks Show. People can see you in a variety of outlets, both telling the actual trajectory, at least the modern trajectory of how we got where we are in Brazil today, which obviously has ramifications for what's happening right now in Venezuela with this attempted coup, and across really, I would say, kind of east-west, north-south politics. And I want you to actually do that again for us briefly, just to reset. Could you get us to really the basically the rise and successes of Lula and the Workers' Party, and Dilma and the imprisonment of Lula, and how these forces from U.S. foreign policymakers, Wall Street, Sergio Moro, converged to bring a current and it looks like faltering fascist government into power in Brazil?
Okay, well, in honor of the failed coup attempt that's underway in Venezuela right now, I will use petroleum as the narrative thread in this version of the story. Okay? Mm-hmm. So basically, there was a dictatorship in Brazil until 1985. Despite petroleum interests being behind the dictatorship, the military never privatized Brazil's state petroleum company. Then around 2006, after Lula had been in power for a couple of years, Brazil discovered some of the world's largest offshore petroleum reserves and announced that its state petroleum company, Petrobras, had developed very cheap technology and efficient technology for extracting deep water offshore petroleum reserves, right? At this point, we know from Edward Snowden. Can you hear the thunder that's going on? It's pouring out here.
We definitely can hear the thunder. This is it adds the prophetic resonance of your. Yeah, this is good. It's like Hebrew prophets.
I guess I don't have to say then that there's dark clouds hanging over South American democracy today.
Right. You do not. Quite literally, okay. Right? Yeah.
So there we go again. All right. So basically at this point we know that the NSA started spying on Petrobras Petroleum Company. Suddenly Brazil was positioned to be transformed into one of the world's leading petroleum producers. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now this had ramifications because as we know, as we can see by what's going on in Venezuela right now, when a country gets too much petroleum, the United States starts getting very interested. And so we know through leaked State Department cables from 2009 that the U.S. government started engaging in a partnership ostensibly to fight corruption in Brazil with a local public prosecutor's office in the city of Curitiba in southern Brazil, led by a man named Sergio Moro. Okay, so this led to this huge anti-corruption investigation called Lava Jato, or Operation Car Wash in English, alleging that millions of dollars had been embezzled through Petrobras, some newspapers calling it the biggest scandal of all times, and then it bled into a bunch of other major Brazilian industries, many of which had big holdings in the United States, like JBS Meatpacking Company, which bought Swift a couple of years ago, like Odebrecht Construction Company. Here we go again. Odebrecht, thunder.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, so they started these investigations. And not to say that there wasn't corruption, wasn't a lot of corruption. In fact, the oil industry, the petroleum industry, is one of the five most corrupt industries in the world.
Right.
By accounts. It's like the drug industry, like the pesticide industry. If you scratch under the surface in any petroleum company, you're going to find all kinds of corruption.
Right.
Look at Shell, for example, in Nigeria,
right.
Bragging about placing cabinet ministers,
yep.
things like that. So you're not – okay, so anyway, despite the fact that they were unable to prove any links between Dilma Rousseff and corruption in Petrobras, it was used as an excuse to commit character assassination against her in the media and in the U.S. media. In the New York Times, during the week before the 2014 re-elections, or when she ran for re-election in 2014, the New York Times connected her to corruption in the petroleum, in Petrobras, like in 7 different moments in articles leading up to the election. John Oliver connected her to corruption in Petrobras Petroleum Company on his show,
Mm-hmm.
And basically none of that was ever, they couldn't ever find any evidence of this. So she was impeached on a budget technicality. Mm-hmm. She was removed from office on a technicality by a Congress that, most of the members of Congress had corruption charges open against them for other things anyway, including the head of Congress at the time is now in jail for stealing tens of millions of dollars. So she was thrown out. Then they started moving against Lula once again, constantly driving the idea that he was involved in corruption with Petrobras Petroleum Company. In fact, The Guardian, on the day Lula was arrested, lied about this and said that his corruption charges were connected to $49 million or something of embezzlement in Petrobras Petroleum Company, which Sergio Moro himself said in the sentence was absolutely not the case. They couldn't find any evidence of this. So you see in this ongoing process in which they removed a democratically elected leader on a budget technicality that was legalized a week after she left office, and then arrested the leading candidate in the 2018 presidential elections after spending years publicly associating him with corruption in the petroleum industry, which didn't exist. We get to this point where the far right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro was able to take power, and he appointed the man who was the prosecutor and the judge in the charges against Lula as his justice minister. Or in other words, the same man who removed Lula from the elections when he was leading with double the popularity of any other contender got a present in return for that. And now he's working to protect Bolsonaro's son against corruption charges. So
yeah, and to be clear, when you said legalize it a week after, what just to spell it out for a second, the budget technicality, and to be clear, everybody should go look this up. I mean, literally, they removed Dilma Rousseff for essentially the equivalent of if Obama gave like some type of budget projection score that you could say, oh, that wasn't, no, there's actually more in the ag department than he's saying, right? Like if Republicans removed Obama for a bad CBO score is essentially what we're talking about. And then the maneuver that was technically illegal that they used, I guessed, they specifically made legal a week after they used it to remove her from office. So, and I want to touch though on this theme of corruption because it's going to get us into the genuinely jaw-dropping, corruption allegations that are now swirling around the Bolsonaro operation and potential stories that connecting them to a cartel gang that assassinated Marielle Franco. But I think more on a bigger picture. This use of corruption politics has been the friend of fascism across the globe. Donald Trump ran a generic drain the swamp campaign. In India, Narendra Modi talked constantly of corruption. And it spells out a couple of things. So one, it's the enormous double standards. Look, if in Venezuela or Nicaragua, which again, I think we could be intellectually honest, there's problems in these places, and we still, of course, obviously oppose U.S. interference. But if there was a left-wing government that was perceived of as anti-United States, and the leading contender was thrown in jail by a guy who then became on spurious charges that could never be spelled out or verified, and then became justice minister in a left-wing government that he put into place because he took a internationally recognized icon and put him into solitary confinement. That would be, well, I mean, as big as any international story is in the United States, but it would cause quite a huff here, and there'd be a lot of official sounding statements from, the State Department and so on, right? So there's that obvious contradiction. Then there's the fact that these governments, and we're going to get into Bolsonaro in a second, have their own, just jaw-dropping corruption allegations. And then there's the bigger context of how are we even defining corruption anyways? I mean, okay, you discover kickbacks at an oil company. As you said, I mean, you'll discover that anywhere that there's an oil business, maybe the least of which in Norway, maybe. I mean, right? But what is Bolsonaro appointing a set of ministers that are going to privatize the country and sell it off to Wall Street and Canadian logging firms? Like, that's not corruption? Anyways, I just want to, take it in any direction you want to go in, but I just think it's very important that these generic terms like corruption that are thrown around and are always leveraged in the modern context by the far right be really interrogated, because people constantly like, oh, well, corruption's bad, and we got to be really clear about what the hell we're exactly talking about here.
Yeah, I feel like corruption has become a mind-stopping cliche.
Right.
The way that the media uses it. You hear the word and your mind stops functioning.
Right.
Oh, he was corrupt.
Oh, Brian. I think we lost Brian. No, we're reconnecting. Hey, Brian, are you there?
Yeah, hey, sorry, man.
Hey.
It really, when it rains in Sao Paulo, it really rains.
No worries. I'm glad you're back. You were just, let's just take it from where you were. We have about another 10 minutes. You were saying corruption as a thought-stopping cliche. Please go from there.
It's a mind-stopping cliche. I feel like basically, since the United States doesn't have any more moral authority on human rights issues, even though it still tries to use them as excuses for justified interventions, it has to use other justifications to take down governments that don't completely suck up to all of their demands. So corruption is an easy thing to accuse people of. Mussolini loved to accuse leftists of being corrupt. It's a constant theme. Corruption was a theme used to try and take down the left in Brazil leading up to the 1964 military coup. So that's why I think it's used so much. But I think you have to look at what's really going on when these charges come about and the way that the media is using them. Because in the case of Lula, there was never any material evidence presented against him, and they couldn't even create a formal charge. He was charged with undetermined acts of corruption based on one plea bargain testimony from a man who had already been jailed and received huge reduction of his sentence and transfer to house arrest and partial retention of millions of dollars in assets for basically delivering the script that Sergio Moro could use to put him in jail. Mm-hmm. And then you compare that to the charges against Jair Bolsonaro's son.
Well, let's spell those out. What are the charges against Jair Bolsonaro's son, and what has been happening in terms of the revelations? I mean, we already know that Jair Bolsonaro is a far-right, bigoted autocrat, client of U.S. interests. But in the past couple of weeks, it's been just the speed at which some of these incredibly serious corruption allegations, particularly around his son, have come out. Spell those out for us. What's happening here? And then, of course, how is this great crusader against corruption, Sergio Moro, who created Lula as a political prisoner and now serves in this government, what's he have to say about all this? I'm assuming he's resigning in protest.
Yeah, right. Of course not. But, okay, so in Rio de Janeiro, historically large swaths of the city have been controlled by organized crime groups, by drug gangs. Mm-hmm. In the early 2000s, groups of off-duty or retired or former police officers got together to try and drive the drug dealers out of one favela on the west side of the city called Rio das Pedras. And it's what started out of kind of like noble goal of like making the neighborhood safer and stuff quickly turned into this kind of extortion gang that operates on the same principles like as the mafia. They charge protection money from local businesses, and they wreak out very brutal justice in their neighborhood, which is very similar to the kind of rhetoric Bolsonaro used to get elected, which is that they kill petty thieves They kill rapists and they shoot people for smoking marijuana, things like that. And so basically, the leader of this, they're paramilitary militias, basically, and they've spread to other neighborhoods around Rio de Janeiro now. But the first one is this one from Rio das Pedras. And so the civil police anti-organized crime unit just conducted a raid and arrested a bunch of their leaders. And as it turns out, the biggest leader is this former captain from the military police special forces, who has been honored 2 times in the city council by Flavia Bolsonaro. He's received honorary awards in the city council.
That's Jair Bolsonaro's son.
Jair Bolsonaro's son, who was just elected senator. So then, it's subsequently come out that this militia leader's mother and wife were working as employees of Flavio Bolsonaro. And there's another employee of Flavio Bolsonaro's, supposedly his driver, who's been busted in this huge paper trail of making dozens of illicit deposits into Flavio Bolsonaro's bank account. At one point, he gave 25,000 reais to Jair Bolsonaro's wife. And so there's now this whole paper trail of what appears to be money laundering activities going on. And it's come out that this militia leader's wife and girlfriend have been working for Flavio Bolsonaro without actually having to show up to work and kicking back 90% of their salaries every month to the driver, who then transferred it into Flavio's bank accounts, along with other phantom employees. It's come out that Flavio Bolsonaro had a full-time job in Brasilia working in the cabinet of his father when his father was congressman, at the same time that he was doing an internship at a university in Rio de Janeiro that he had to show up for work at. So he was supposedly working at 2 places in the same time. And now, it's also come out that there were these 2 twin brother military police officers who were arrested for being militia members a month and a half ago. Their sister is the treasurer for Jair Bolsonaro's political party in Rio de Janeiro, the PSL. She's the political party treasurer on the books as an employee of Flavio Bolsonaro, as a member of his cabinet, until 2 months ago when these investigations began. So as this all thickens, as this plot thickens, it's come out that this militia organization called the Escritório do Crime from Rio das Pedras is the #1 suspect in the Marielle Franco assassination. City Councilwoman Marielle Franco, who was brutally assassinated last year for apparently, one of the things that she was doing before she was assassinated was heavily criticizing and trying to get investigations underway into the connection between the military police and these militias. Right. Okay? So, and Jair Bolsonaro was the only candidate for president who did not make a public statement on Marielle Franco's death. And so meanwhile, as this is all going on, Sergio Moro, who was hailed as this impartial, non-political anti-corruption crusader in the New York Times and all the other hegemonic media in the North, as he was arresting Lula for nothing, he's now taken all kinds of legal measures to protect Flavio Bolsonaro from prosecution, including firing the guy who announced that all of the evidence had been found on these illegal bank transfers and money laundering, was fired from his office and replaced with someone. And he's also saying, well, this office, it's like an office of auditing from the federal government of politicians and stuff. COAF it's called anyway. But now he's saying, well, they're not allowed to communicate any of their information to the press, which is ironic because Sergio Moro was busted illegally wiretapping Lula and Dilma Rousseff and leaking that to the press when he was going after them, and he got a slap on the wrist from the Supreme Court for that. So his whole modus operandi is leaking information on allegations and rumors and hearsay against the PT party, but now he's blocked his own government from doing it against the Bolsonaro family. Right,
and also, and I think is it correct that as Bolsonaro has obviously announced this wave of austerity measures in keeping with his Wall Street aligned advisors, that one area where there's a pay increase is for the judiciary. That was, of course, so helpful in blocking the democratic process and jailing Lula.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that happened after the coup was that Temer gave a big raise to the judiciary. But now, yeah, basically it's very confusing because they're using Trump-style cognitive dissonance psyops techniques where one member of the government will announce some huge change. Everyone in the media starts talking about it. And then a week later, someone else says, no, it's not really going to happen. The guy was wrong. But the economics minister of Bolsonaro is a University of Chicago trained super neoliberal economist who lived in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship. Was friends with a bunch of people in Pinochet's inner circle. And he's trying to do all kinds of crazy austerity reforms. And they want to do a Chilean-style reform of the retirement system. And Bolsonaro's announced he's going to spare the judiciary and the military from that, of course. And they're obviously the ones who create the biggest drain on the retirement system. So
even if you were following that really narrow logic, that would be the place you'd want to cut. All right, we only have a couple minutes more, but I do want to touch on, obviously, there's this attempted coup happening in Venezuela. And again, there's the nature of the Venezuelan government is a completely secondary conversation when the United States attempts to, remove a neighboring government from power. So you had also just done an interview in Brazil Wire, and one of the reasons, Brazil Wire is indispensable for Brazil, and one of the reasons is frankly, in addition to very smart analysis from people like Brian, it's also one of the only places in the United States or in English language media where you can just read interviews with people who, look, not only the left in Brazil, but in fact, still one of the, maybe organizationally, still the most important political party in Brazil, the Workers' Party, the PT. And you just did an interview with the head of PT, who she had just returned actually from a trip to Venezuela. So is there a way, and of course Bolsonaro is completely signed on to this Trump CIA effort. What is the sort of PT, what is the Brazilian dynamic left and right in relation to what's happening in Venezuela right now?
Well, it's very clear, regardless of what, I like to compare Venezuela to like the AFL-CIO, because I could look at the AFL-CIO and say, oh, look, they've done all these problems, they've done all these stupid things over the years. But, in general, I still support them, and I support the autonomy and the self-determination of their base-level members to elect whoever they want to AFL-CIO leadership.
Right.
I'm not going to say we have to get rid of the AFL-CIO. Yeah. And so Gleisi Hoffmann was attacked repeatedly by a bunch of reporters from The Guardian for going to Maduro's inauguration. And Chavez and Lula were good friends and everything. And so especially Tom Phillips, he spent a whole day ridiculing her on Twitter. Tom Phillips is like the Latin America editor of Guardian now. And so she made a statement to the press. She said, anyone who criticizes my visit to Venezuela doesn't understand the concepts of sovereignty and self-determination. And so when I interviewed her, I said, look, I actually don't think a lot of Americans and British people really understand those concepts very well because both countries have such a long imperialist history. Even a lot of progressives and liberals think that, for example, the U.S. should, if they see something going wrong in another country, should step in and solve human rights issues or whatever. So she said basically the PT had to go and participate in Maduro's inauguration because they respect the sovereignty and the self-determination of the Venezuelan people. Maduro was elected with 67% of the vote. The opposition guy who declared himself president didn't even run for office because he knew he was going to lose. Okay, so Chavez and Maduro, whatever their faults were, they did a lot to strengthen the third world left, and the PT is in full solidarity with them at this moment, just as the governments of China and Russia Turkey, and Mexico have all announced that they refuse to recognize Guindon or whatever as the president of Venezuela. So basically, I think that it's important to know that all of the labor unions and all of the social movements in South America right now are on the sides of the Maduro administration. Right. There's a class divide at work. And as I'm saying this, I'm sure there's going to be some people going on commenting saying, oh, I'm from Venezuela. You don't know what's going on down there, whatever. It's important to know that the middle class, whites, from these countries in South America that have a long legacy of slavery like Brazil and Venezuela, generally act more progressive than they really are when they're in the United States, if they're up there living in the United States. And there's a huge amount of racism. This is a very entitled social class. The working class and the poor in countries like Venezuela and Brazil don't speak English. English is a sign of being a member of the elite. And we're talking about people who grew up with armies of servants and kitchen maids, women washing their underwear for them and stuff, who are now acting like they care about the fate of the poor people in their countries. Just as when I start talking about Lula, I get trolled by Brazilians up in the U.S. Even mentioning, I saw Boots Riley was being trolled by Venezuelan whites yesterday on Twitter too. So just keep in mind.
Well, keep in mind, one of the most stunning, and I know you have obviously way more experience in images of this, but I'll just leave it with this. I saw an image. And I'll admit, I think actually I did do a little bit of coverage of the coup in real time, and we called it right. Although I think, at that time, particularly before the coup, I had more room for talking about, a sort of broader analysis of the dynamics in Brazil, but still recognizing the achievements of PT in opposing the coup. But one of the things that really brought it home for me, just at the outset, before I even did more research, was just a photo of, a light-skinned, upper-middle-class family in regalia going to an anti-PT protest, and literally, like, a black woman maid walking behind them looking pissed. I was like, all right, I think I know what side of this equation I trust. And, there's a lot more to be spelled out. And I'm not going to, carry water for anybody, but the basic dynamics are in place. It is what it is, and we have to oppose it. Although that being said, Brian, I recognize Lula as president of Brazil. So
yeah, I posted your tweet on my Facebook page yesterday, and
nice.
Hundreds of Brazilians shared it and everything. Everyone was greatly approved it.
Awesome. Well, Lula Livre, Brian Mier, I appreciate your time as always. Please, everybody, read and contribute to Brazil Wire. It's indispensable, and follow Brian's work really all over the place now. One of the sort of positive things that have happened over the last several months is now a lot more people, I think, are reading you and Brazil Wire.
Yeah, well, thanks for your support with it as well. I'm sure you've contributed to that being happening.
It's my honor.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Talk to you soon.
All right, take it easy.
Bye. All right, folks, we are going to take a very brief break and come back with Eva Golinger. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Joining us now is Eva Golinger. She is the former legal advisor to Hugo Chavez. She's a journalist, television host, investigative reporter, author of Confidant of quote-unquote Tyrants, which is a memoir of her political work in Venezuela, how she came to play that role, and her meeting with many other people, including Fidel Castro, Gaddafi, and others. Eva, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So, Eva, to the extent it's possible, where are we right now? And by the way, I've been calling it an attempted coup. Would you use that same terminology in Venezuela?
Oh, yeah. It's beyond an attempted coup. It's a coup that's still developing. It's a coup in development because there's still no final outcome. It's not a coup that's been yet thwarted. It's not a coup that was successful. It's still playing out in real time, and there's really no clear end game at this stage. And I think that goes to show even further the level of improvisation that we're dealing with here with this particular government in the United States that, of course, has been backing this and encouraging it now for a while, but particularly over the past few weeks as things have developed in Venezuela that have given way to this as well, opened the doors to it. But it's really the improvisation that's terrifying because we have that in the United States. We're living that daily with the Trump administration and everything, all their policies and what they're trying to do, what he's particularly doing, the way he operates. And now we're seeing it play out with an incredibly volatile, dangerous foreign policy issue. And so, and the opposition in Venezuela has a history of improvisation. It's also part of the culture in Venezuela, but, they did this in 2002 when they tried to overthrow Hugo Chavez in a coup that was briefly successful and then was defeated by a popular uprising of the majority of Venezuelans and also loyal military forces. But at that time, the opposition had done the same thing. They had convinced Washington that they could do it. And so Washington backed them in every way possible, funneling millions of dollars and all the political and diplomatic support and even military support. They sent in, there were ships there were Black Hawk helicopters. They were all in for this. And then at the last minute, they realized, oh man, these people, they're not going to be able to do it. So the U.S. tried to back out and It was too late. They went forward, they failed. So now we're seeing it once again, although this time the stakes are higher and the situation is different. There's, at that time, I think Chavez was also more fresh in his role as president and people were just horrified that was happening in the country. It was, outrageous. But now it's been a prolonged period of crisis in the country. Nicolas Maduro is not Chavez. He doesn't enjoy that same level of admiration from his supporters. They basically put up with him because he's the guy that Chavez asked them to elect. And so they did. And he's the only one so far who's shown the leadership to carry forward, that particular project, the Bolivarian Revolution, even though it's been disastrous under his rule. But at the same time, it's different. The level of morality is low. People are suffering a severe economic crisis. The number one problem is corruption in his government. He's constantly making promises that he can't keep, can't follow through on. Nothing's gotten better. The economy is really just completely devastated. And so I think there's much more support for change in the country. And when this guy, Juan Guiado, who's a relatively unknown face of the opposition, took on this very charismatic stance and doesn't have that same tarnished history as other opposition leaders do as participating in past coups and violence and, just corrupt political parties. This guy's very young, fresh-faced, charismatic, making also big promises of stability and transition and reconciliation. So I think there's more openness to hearing him out. But at the same time, we have a change in the region. Just a few years ago, a majority of countries would never have backed a situation like this. They would never have endorsed any kind of regime change in a neighboring country. And the tables have turned entirely. It's really astonishing to see how the transformation in Latin America just a few years ago was a unified front against foreign intervention. It was, proclaiming their independence and sovereignty and as a regional power unified. And now, of course, it's completely divided on ideological lines. And a majority of countries in South America have come out against Maduro and are supporting this coup. And so that combined with the Trump administration's unwavering and very enthusiastic support that could include some kind of military intervention is what could push this over the edge. But I would just add, before concluding this summary of events is that, the major game changer here, of course, is the Venezuelan military. And at this very moment, they're backing Maduro. And it would be hard to see them cross the line to back an opposition that's supported by the United States, because that would clearly be seen as treasonous. Right. And is not, most of these military, they may not support what Maduro's doing, but they certainly support the defense and sovereignty of their nation. So there would have to be a different sort of way out that wouldn't be seen as aligning with the United States. And then, of course, we have to factor in Russia and China's support for Maduro, which creates Venezuela or turns Venezuela into a geopolitical battlefield. That's a struggle then between the West and, Russia and China over this country with the largest oil reserves on the planet.
What, the second largest oil reserves on the planet?
The largest oil reserves.
The largest oil reserves on the planet. So okay, well, I want to just for a minute deal with basically the Bolivarian project and the social formation around it. And I like that you outlined it. And again, I keep saying, if ever there was a time to be able to hold multiple thoughts in your head at once, it would be now, obviously, right? So, of course, there are failings of Nicolas Maduro and of this present government. And there's also massive accomplishments of particularly Hugo Chavez, which we have no discussion of in the United States, right? And obviously, during an attempted coup, the primary responsibility of those of us in the United States is to actively and vehemently oppose a coup. And so all of that being said, in terms of the social formation around Maduro, you talked about obviously the popular surge that protected Chavez from the Bush 2002 coup. I've heard, and I'm talking to you because you're a source I trust, right? There's a lot of sources I don't even know enough to trust or not trust, frankly. But one of the things I've heard is that, unlike in previous efforts, there are poorer parts of Caracas, as an example, places where the traditional social base of this of Bolivarian politics have rallied before to defend this project from foreign intervention and domestic oligarchs, but that there's actually some of those demographics are rising up as well because things have been so bad. And I guess I have a two-part question. One, is that true? And secondly, what is the combination here of internal failings versus just the relentless U.S. pressure of sanctions and investment in opposition as well? What's the kind of fusion of innate failings versus ongoing relentless U.S. interference?
This is really a type of what you would call low-intensity warfare or asymmetric warfare. It's been going on for a long time. That does not discount the role that the government itself has played in their own dysfunctional policies and their, allowing corruption to basically become a malignant force within the government. But at the same time, there's no question. Particularly the U.S. through their different funding agencies like USAID or National Endowment for Democracy, even just directly through State Department, think tanks like Freedom House, others that are used as fronts to channel funds to, and even in some cases creating NGOs that work to undermine governments that aren't favorable to U.S. agenda, that this over time is a way, it just tires out the people. It becomes it penetrates so deeply into civil society that it's unrecognizable as being something imposed from external, interests. So, that does play a huge role in what's gone on in the poorer neighborhoods. But at the same time, the primary reason that, a majority of lower income areas supported Chavez in the first place was because of his policies. Yeah, he was a charismatic guy. He cared about people. But, they wouldn't have supported him for so long and put their lives on the line to defend him for so many years in the face of so much destabilization and, different attempted coups and aggressions against them, if it wasn't for the fact that his policies were servicing their basic needs. People were the quality of life improved dramatically under Chavez. So all of that now has been rolled back under Maduro, in part because of sanctions and economic warfare from private enterprises and abroad. But I have to say, I know what's going on there. There's a lot of corruption. They've been embezzling a lot of money out, and it's mismanagement. So there are bad people in place in charge of a lot of the finances of the country, and they've been stealing money. That just straight out. So that's also a combination of what's been going on. And so, yes, the support from the traditional grassroots community bases in Venezuela for the government has dramatically eroded over the past couple of years because of the economic crisis, primarily because of that, because in general, people don't care as much if their president has authoritarian tendencies or not, so long as they can eat and earn a decent wage and, pay for all their expenses. It comes down to that. Most people are not highly politicized and aren't thinking about that on an everyday basis. They're thinking about how much money do they have and can they afford everything that they need in their lives. So once the tables start to turn on that, you think with your stomach. That was always something said in Venezuela before Chavez and afterward, is people think first with their stomach. If you can't eat, you're going to get angry. And so you're going to blame who's in charge, who's preventing that, you from being able to meet your basic needs. And in this case, it is Maduro. So I think that is absolutely true. And I've been talking nonstop to people on the ground in different areas around the country. And last night was a night full of protests, bullets, people got killed. There was a lot of commotion in all over Caracas, particularly, and in the poorer neighborhoods as well, in popular sectors. And then at the same time, Maduro people and he himself called for his supporters to rally around the presidential palace and protect him. Nobody was out there at midnight. It was empty. Wow. So that would never have happened during Chavez. People would have slept out there if they needed to. So I think that's a huge change, is we're not seeing kind of support for Maduro.
Do you think that might change just as the United States continues this and there's like an actual threat of military action? Like, does that logic start to shift back of, wait a second, whatever, like the same logic that you said that the military officers might have, that whatever else we say about him, we can't have a coup here. And incidentally, what opposition realistically in any way is going to, my sense is that the people that oppose Maduro that would be backed by the United States, all of the same problems, whether they be corruption or embezzlement or, cartel connections, whatever, sure, there'll be all of that, and there'll be a complete elimination of the social advances and autonomy that this government has delivered.
Well, and let's not kid ourselves. The opposition is comprised of political parties primarily that ruled before or are some kind of hybrid of those that had power before the Bolivarian Revolution, extremely corrupt, embezzled billions of dollars out of the country, were responsible for the skyrocketing poverty in Venezuela and the marginalization of a majority of Venezuelans. So, that is obviously a concern. But at this stage, people feel as though, well, we don't, if we can get food on our plates, then it may not matter who's in power. And so I think it'll come down to that. There certainly is a hardcore base of supporters, Chavistas, I would say. They're not necessarily Maduristas, like Maduro hardcore supporters, but they believe they're following through on that project, which is really about Venezuela's sovereignty and a project of social justice, and they would fight to the death. So there are civilian militias that are trained and armed. It's not a country that's defenseless, and they do have the backing of Russia. They do have powerful equipment. Doesn't mean they could come up against the U.S. military in any sense, but they wouldn't go out with like their heads between their knees. There are a lot who would fight. That said, I think that hopefully it won't come to that, and there could be some kind of negotiated process out of this situation. But what's happening now is completely unprecedented, violates every concept of international law, sovereignty, rights to self-determination. I mean, essentially, the legislative branch, the head of the legislative branch has declared himself the head of the executive branch, is being recognized by, powerful foreign nations, and is working presently out of the Colombian embassy in Caracas to set up a government. I mean, he has no control over anything in the country. He doesn't have control over institutions. He doesn't have control over the finances. So he doesn't have control over the oil industry. So that it comes down to, what is the next step here? This is all developing in real time and seems highly improvised, and it doesn't seem as though they really have a clear path forward. If they think that Maduro is going to just walk out of the presidential palace, I would say, I could be wrong. Things could change, but as it stands right now, I just do not see that happening.
I mean, obviously, they've been trying to instigate something for quite some time, right? I mean, and going back, of course, Bush through Obama, you called it the high intensity and, the economic warfare against Venezuela. But specifically with Trump, that was one of the reasons that, that ridiculous John Oliver commentary on Venezuela that was such, nonsense from a year or two ago, because he was dismissing the idea that the Venezuelan government was putting forward of U.S. interference literally at the same time that Mike Pompeo, when he was head of the CIA, was actually publicly saying this. And of course, Trump has said any number of things threatening Maduro and Venezuela publicly. And I think on some level, obviously there's a bigger history behind this, but this might be the time to instigate this because the government shutdown strategy is totally failing, right? Like, that really is the level of just total nonsense we're dealing with in terms of Trump, in addition to the traditional U.S. interests that would, and have instigated over 40 something coups in Latin America in the last, couple of dozen years. So if you were back there advising, what would first, I guess before we get to your potential solution space, do you actually think that it could get as bad as some type of military invasion? And does that specifically have to do with Maduro expelling diplomats and them refusing to leave?
Well, there could be a standoff. That certainly seems like a provocation on the part of the United States to, refuse to obey that's international law. That's the Vienna Convention on diplomatic and consular relations, that every country has the right to make that kind of decision. That's a sovereign right. At the same time, the U.S. Embassy in Caracas, the U.S. residence in Caracas for its diplomats, those are sovereign territories of the United States. That's how it works. So Venezuelan forces can't go into those spaces and forcibly remove them. I don't think that they would do that anyway. I think it would just be a very volatile standoff. However, if they were to be provoked and something were to happen, I foresee a Grenada type situation where the U.S. would then say, we have to go in and rescue our people. So we're bringing in the Marines, and that could open the door, or they could do it with special forces. Colombia is right on the other side of Venezuela's border. They have a massive military presence, particularly of special forces in Colombia and U.S. military bases. So, this has been, the U.S. has been preparing for a regime change in Venezuela now from the time pretty much the coup failed against Chavez in 2002. It's a state policy. It's not partisan,
Right.
It's bipartisan. So this is just a culmination. I think that, as we're seeing with most of the Trump administration, Trump particularly himself, he's just sloppy with his agenda. He just blurts it out. Most of them would have kept it sort of under wraps. This is what we're doing. They've just been open and notorious about, we want regime change, and Trump himself has said now at least 3 times publicly that he's considering a military option in Venezuela. So there's really no clear indication of how that would play out, except for the fact that it would be extraordinarily dangerous and messy and would probably result in a bloodbath. What else is going to happen?
Right.
What good has come of any U.S. intervention anywhere in the world? And then if Maduro and his inner circle decide to bunker down as they're doing so far, I mean, then we're looking at a similar, like an Assad situation like in Syria. And it wouldn't be the first time. Venezuela has already been mapped out by who knows how many military strategists, particularly in the U.S., but also in Colombia and around the world, to divide the country, because the oil reserves are in certain areas. They're not, all over the country. They've mapped it out. They could take it. It's by Brazil. It's by Colombia. They could take control of those areas and carve it out and into pieces, just like has happened in other countries where there have been similar situations. Libya, for example, I mean, where they go in, they create a disaster because there's really no plan, and unexpected things happen that they didn't account for. And that could be the case in Venezuela. I do think that if there's not some kind of pause put on this as soon as possible, and some more measured voices involved, as we're seeing now, like the UN Secretary General is making statements saying, this needs to slow down. We need to have dialogue to prevent disaster in Venezuela. We're hearing it. What we're hearing more in the media are the more sort of bellicose, the more aggressive voices, like the Trump administration and the OAS Secretary General, who's salivating over a military intervention in Venezuela for regime change. But, we need more measured voices. Mexico is playing that role of trying to calm the situation and encourage dialogue. Even Spain. Even France, Macron has not endorsed the opposition. He's calling for, dialogue and negotiated transition or something of the sort.
Spain specifically said, no, we don't recognize the opposition, if I understand correctly.
And I think it was more a call to dialogue.
Okay.
It wasn't a sort of assertive no, but it was more,
Gotcha.
We're not going down that path right now. And I think that that's respectable at this stage. It's not a solid position, but that's because they don't have, a fantastic relationship at the moment, because Spain has a more right-wing government in place. There are countries that are taking a more measured stance, and there are those that are taking a more aggressive one. And so we just need to look at the interest behind those countries. The U.S. has a direct interest. They want Venezuela's oil. Venezuela is a geostrategic nation. They want control of it again, like they had before. Russia's there, Iran is there, China's there. They want the U.S. wants them out. Right. So they have a very specific and direct interest in regime change. And other countries are more measured. Mexico, even Bolivia, that backs Maduro. But, Evo Morales just wants peace in the region. I mean, they want stability. And the same, I think, would go for even China. China didn't come out and say, we back Nicolas Maduro. They just said, we do not back foreign interference in Venezuela's affairs.
Right. Well, Eva Golinger, I really appreciate your time as always. I recommend that everybody who uses Twitter as an example be following Eva, because this is a main source for understanding what goes on. We're going to talk more about this in the second half of the show, but I mean, this is a time, not to be puritanical about it, but I mean, Ro Khanna has stepped forward and opposed this. There's been some sort of signal boost for that, I think, from Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But this is a one that everybody's going to need to get on the map on if they have any kind of claim to any type of sort of left-wing leadership, because this is a coup and could be, like Grenada, except even worse because of just the stakes, right? Not that Grenada wasn't horrible in and of itself. Eva Golinger, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much as always.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Appreciate it. All right, folks. So become a member of the Majority Report today. You get content like that. I don't even know how cable news is covering it. Independent, unbought, unbossed, less pennies a day. Click the Become a Member link and join, and also subscribe to the show on YouTube if you haven't already, all the other ways. We cover this sort of thing in depth on the Michael Brooks Show, and a lot of the history and the context around this as well. As an example, we just did an illicit history of Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution with Eva Golinger for patrons of the Michael Brooks Show. Become a patron of it today at patreon.com/DMBS, and also go check out the YouTube channel for the Michael Brooks Show. Overlapping but distinct content there, and it will give you a flavor of the show. Good running thread on the tracksuits I'm wearing as well. And there's some tickets left. Legit, not many at this point, but some to our first live show, Bell House, February 1st. Snag them while you can and become a patron. Patreon.com/TMBS. Jamie, what it do? I'm sorry, Matt. Don't yell into the mic.
So this week on the Antifada, we have the second ever edition of History is a Weapon with Sean, KB, and special guest Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House. They get a little bit personal, actually. They talk about why both of their brains have been broken by history and their personal connections to that. Also, they answer the question, why, of all advanced capitalist countries, is the United States unique in its historical failure to form a bona fide labor socialist party that's organically tied to the union labor movement as an institutionalized political expression of working class interests?
Sounds like Matt Crispin might be an American exceptionalist.
Well, America is exceptional in maybe some bad ways. Yeah, that's true. But it turns out that America was ahead of the curve on that. On this division between the labor movement and any kind of left political party, right? Because Europe, for a while, had them, and then those parties all turned neoliberal at the end of the day. Labor is trying to realign right now, but it's sort of interesting that the U.S. got there first, and then the other countries took kind of a roundabout journey. So they go back and forth about history. They both know a lot about history. P.S. I just listened to it, and I learned a lot, actually.
Awesome. Matt.
Literary hangover. We did The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a very weird story about how Puritans lived on through basically inheritance into the 18th century. Beautiful.
All right, folks. We will see you on the fun half. Wait, what was that?
We'll do this. We're going to do this song again. This is a Sam Cedar remix, so it'll be a shorter into the fun half, but people like this instead.
All right. Okay.
Calling from a 919 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from? Wow. Awesome. Well, let's just do this exercise.
Do it.
Whoa. Super sick.
It's all good.
Super sick.
Hell yeah.
Right. You don't need to means test Social Security. You don't need to means test Medicare. Nobody cares. The way that you means test that, you tax wealthy people more. What's the point? And that's just simply not enough.
And as you always say, as soon as you stick in that access, then we already do have universal health.
I have access to a BMW.
Right.
It's a weird time for politics right now.
That's legit galaxy brain.
This is a freak shit.
Love it all.
He finally gets to fulfill his destiny. Burger sommelier. Just a little baby.
Very legal. Very good.
I thought this was a joke.
Hamburglar.
Well, I mean, but things are really bad. But